Hello and welcome to the forum. I'm Marvin Kalb, director of the Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy here at the Kennedy School. Our subject tonight is, have the tabloids gone too far? That the tabloids have gone anywhere in recent time would probably have come as a great surprise to Walter Lippmann, the legendary guru of American press, who said with characteristic certainty back in 1931, and I quote, "Yellow journalism, and in its latest and perhaps last manifestation as tabloid journalism, is not, I believe, enduring. When everything is dramatic, nothing after a while is dramatic. When everything is highly spiced, nothing after a while has much flavor. When everything is new and startling, the human mind just ceases to be startled," unquote. Mr. Lippmann, you didn't fully appreciate the resilience, the power, the money-making potential, the capacity of the tabloids to fascinate and titillate the American public. Because tabloid journalism is doing well, indeed is doing so well, that some people are concerned that perhaps the mainstream press and television are going tabloid themselves. This all came to a head during the tragic events leading up to and following the death of Princess Diana. It's a good, timely, and interesting topic of conversation, and we got the panelists to discuss it. First, to my left, Russell Turiak, who is a freelance celebrity journalist, a proud member of the so-called paparazzi, who has been in business as a photojournalist for 20 years and has appeared on about 60 different talk shows to discuss his craft. To my right, Frederick Schauer, the academic dean of the Kennedy School of Government, the Frank Stanton Professor on the First Amendment, a constitutionalist and a political philosopher in his own right. To my left, Martin Singer, a founding member of the law firm of Lavallee and Singer Professional Corporation, which specializes in entertainment and business litigation. Mr. Singer has represented numerous celebrities in lawsuits against tabloids in the United States, Great Britain, and other countries in Europe and Australia. And finally, Steve Koz, an honors graduate from Harvard, who joined the National Enquirer as a reporter in 1981, rose to become editor in 1995. Time magazine named Koz as one of the 25 most influential people in America, which says something, I'm not quite sure what, about Time magazine or America or both. Our opening question is, have the tabloids gone too far? And we'll go start it first with Russell on my left and then go to Fred, back and forth. Russell?
Okay, with regard to celebrities and the coverage of the, am I loud enough? The coverage of the media, so-called legitimate media, with the death of Princess Diana. There's a hypocrisy in the Hollywood, the business which is quick to exploit McCarthyism in the films that they make. The Front and Guilty by Suspicion, that was the Robert De Niro movie where he just ran down all the extortion, and the movie Tail Gunner Joe, that they play that up for all it's worth, yet in the current environment they use the same kind of extortion and bully behavior to try and suppress that which they don't choose to endorse, which is the tabloid journalists. All's fair in the name of art. I mean, they're quick to make movies about fans and fan clubs, and the baseball movie with, again, Robert De Niro and Wesley Snipes, and in fact, there's 3 movies named The Fan and The King of Comedy. That's fine when they can use it in the name of art, but they still, again, don't go along with it. I have a problem with all the $20 million boys, Arnold and Sylvester and Mel and, who else do we have here? Bruce, that they glorify violence in their movies, and the sociologists are telling us that this is teaching kids how to kill each other. When one of them turns down the $20 million and says, no, I think I want to make a movie about people being kind to each other instead of, taking all the money, maybe there'll be a little validity to what it is that they have to say. But until then, I can't take it seriously. They have a problem with, they enjoy the publicity when they have something to sell, But when that's not convenient for them, they don't want it. When their behavior, when they can get in Architectural Digest, for example, they're quick to do that because it pleases them to show off, like how wonderful their life is and what they've done and what they can buy. But when they behave poorly, they don't want that shown. There's a basic right in this country known as the First Amendment, and they want to change that. This First Amendment is the same rule that allows them all the gratuitous sex and glorified violence and TNA and all the silly, nonsensical, moron movies that they make, and they're allowed to do that under the First Amendment, freedom of speech. But when it's inconvenient for them, they want to change the First Amendment. The nanny wants the First Amendment changed. I guess she wants to go right to the Second Amendment, which she probably believes is the right to wear a short-sleeved shirt, the right to bear arms. As far as the so-called legitimate media goes, which is legitimate and which is illegitimate? Which is the line? The so-called legitimate media did the worst job of the coverage of Princess Diana. They just went with current spin from day to day. They went with, well, it's the paparazzi's fault. Then for about an hour after it wasn't the paparazzi's fault because the guy was drunk, they said, well, they didn't make the phone call. Till this day, and I don't know why they haven't found out, I don't believe I've heard a verification of who it was that made the phone call. But that was another thing to start, hammering on the paparazzi. Nobody really responsibly reported this story. For a long time, a little bit at a time, bits and pieces trickled out about, well, maybe she made a poor choice. He was a playboy. What was wrong with that bodyguard? When President Reagan, there was an attempted assassination on him, he was, a 73-year-old man, if I'm not mistaken? Real professional security guys picked him up like a sack of laundry and threw him in the back of the car and got him out of there. Now, a real professional bodyguard should have told that driver, stop the car now, she and I are getting out. And would have told Dodi Fayed, shut your mouth. You got nothing to say here. You can fire me, but right now I'm protecting her, and that's my job. But he wasn't a security guard, he was a servant. So that was very, very ineffective security or lack thereof. And what you have here is like, a bunch of disinformation by wealthy people trying to make sure that we all understand that it couldn't possibly have been the rich people's fault. It's got to be blamed on the lowest common denominator here, the photographers. Now, I'm not going to say they're entirely off the hook by virtue of them being there. They were speeding. And again, this cliche of high-speed pursuit. What about high-speed escape? Somebody has to be going at high speed to be pursuing them at high speed. That's just totally irrational behavior. There's just no sense in that. I don't know how many celebrities, the self-agendizing, opportunistic celebrities, come on the air and will tell you, I had to go through red lights. Oh, you mean you broke the law? It's out of control. They want to change the First Amendment. That can never happen. I have a quote here from the gentleman with the Freedom Forum, Paul McMasters, who says that the coverage of the death of Princess Diana is a warning sign that the press has become obsessed with making friends, and it may lose its ability to make a difference. This is the so-called legitimate press, at least in defense of the tabloids. They never pretend that they're anything but what they are.
Russell, thank you. Thank you very much. Professor Schauer?
Marvin described me in lots of very flattering ways, but for purposes of
the academic dean.
right, for purposes of this event, I am much prouder of the fact that I worked my way through college as a practicing photojournalist back in the early 1960s, before the invention of motor drives and 600mm lenses. It was a lot harder to be a practicing photojournalist. Perhaps a lot harder to be a paparazzo than it is now. Still, I wasn't asked to talk tonight because of anything about that dimension of my background. Let me just say a few words about the background, legal, and more broadly philosophical issues that we are confronting tonight. Certainly, when we think about the legal environment for a fair amount of what we are now discussing, we ought to recognize that under existing American law, most of what in the vernacular we would refer to as invasion of privacy is not legally actionable. There is a tort in the United States of invasion of privacy. It can be, one can commit that tort by virtue of engaging in unreasonable behavior and even disclosing true things about people that they would not want disclosed. But there is a defense inspired by the First Amendment of newsworthiness for virtually all of the people that we are now talking about. The newsworthiness defense dominates, and therefore under existing law, the possibility of legal liability for these kinds of events is virtually non-existent. Now, that doesn't mean that there is not a serious public policy question about whether the law should be what it is now or whether the law should be different. Unfortunately, once we start thinking about that question, we immediately get swept up in the typical where do you draw the line, thin edge of the wedge, who's to say, parade of horribles, camel's noses in the tent, slippery slope kind of rhetoric that unfortunately drives out serious thinking about the nature of the First Amendment and what the First Amendment ought to be. Let me just say a couple of things as we think about the policy question of whether the invasion of the privacy of public people, and in particular public people with policy responsibilities, ought to be different from what it now is. First of all, we ought to put aside ideas that we are talking about possibilities of civil liability that are substantial in monetary amount or would dramatically change the financial situation of any of the publications we are talking about. In the fiscal year ending March 31st, 1997, American Media Operations Incorporated, which has the National Enquirer, the Star, Weekly World News, Soap Opera Magazine, Soap Opera News, and Country Weekly, had gross revenues of $315,988,000. Against that, its entire expenses for libel and related legal judgments, consisting of judgments, libel insurance, settlements, reading of material in advance, and the like, was approximately $4 million. Compared to the 316, compared to the $87 million of operating income, we are talking about a tiny amount of money. You don't have to believe me about this. Quote, the company does not believe that these lawsuits are material, either singly or in the aggregate, or, quote, any reasonably foreseeable liability or settlement in excess of libel policy deductibles would be covered by insurance. The company's own statements to the Securities and Exchange Commission make it clear that we're talking about very small amounts of money. There is, however, a real issue independent of the amounts of money we are talking about. There are two quite strong arguments, and they go against each other. On one side is the argument that public people, and in particular public officials, ought to have some zone of privacy, some area that they can retreat into, some place where they can be away from public scrutiny. And the argument is not that it's nice for them that they have this. I don't care whether it's nice for them, whether they have this or not. The argument is that in a somewhat different way, there is a chilling effect. Are we losing people who might otherwise go into public life because they are afraid of losing their zone of privacy? It's an empirical question. Are we losing people that we would want in public life? When we talk about celebrities, the answer is probably no. When we talk about people running for office, that's a much more difficult question. The strong argument on the other side is that in a democracy, it is not for the press, and certainly not for the mainstream press, to decide what's relevant or not. In a democracy, if people want to cast their vote for or against Bill Clinton based on what he does in his so-called private life, one argument in a democracy is that that ought not to be decided by the mainstream press. it ought to be decided by the electorate. The argument the other way from what I've just talked about, the argument for full-fledged disclosure of everything, is that questions of sex, questions of alcohol, and other questions that traditionally were treated by the mainstream press as being irrelevant to public performance ought to be matters for the public to decide whether they are relevant or not. If someone decides to vote for someone because of the color of his or her hair or any other allegedly irrelevant factor, the argument against the zone of privacy is that at least for public officials and other public figures of this variety, we ought not to have a filter that's standing between the electorate and these people saying this is really relevant or this is not. I'll stop at that.
Thank you very much, Fred. Martin Singer.
When I heard that the subject was going to be, have the tabloids gone too far, I thought I'd be able to speak for hours. But I'm limited to speak for 5 to 7 minutes. Scandalous, salacious, sensational, those are the buzzwords for the tabloids. A recent headline from one of my clients was, "Demi caught while hubby Bruce nowhere in sight." Now, Demi was at a private birthday party dancing with a male friend who happened to be gay while Bruce Willis was shooting a movie. However, when you read the headline, you thought Demi Moore was unfaithful to her husband. Now, why did that headline appear? Because so happened a paparazzi happened to get into a private party and took a photo while Demi Moore was dancing. The photos that appear in the tabloids, those are many times the vehicle for the stories. If a celebrity, such as Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger, was seen walking down the street, driving a car, or doing something innocuous, the photo may be worth $100. And there certainly is no tabloid story out of that. So what happens, what has happened here in America, is the celebrities begin to get taunted. And if the celebrity gets taunted by the paparazzi, and he angrily points a finger, or he gestures, or he gets into an altercation, or sometimes even gets into a confrontation where he strikes the paparazzi, which has occurred, now you have a major tabloid story. And from the paparazzi standpoint, instead of having a photo that's worth $100, now we got photos that are worth tens of thousands of dollars. The tabloids want sensational and scandalous photos. And what has occurred is the paparazzi now create, and they instigate in many attempts, the confrontations and the stories that appear in the tabloids. My clients, and I represent many celebrities, this has created a major intrusion in their life. And what has also occurred is the paparazzis are willing to engage in criminal and quasi-criminal conduct in order for them to make their big payday. Maybe a paparazzi will be fortunate enough, like that photographer who happened to catch Princess Di and Dodi Fayed on the yacht, and I think he got $6 million for those photos. Now, I want to give you a couple of examples of some of my clients where tabloid stories occurred where they were basically created because of an act of a paparazzi. A few years ago, a paparazzi was involved in a hit and run with one of my clients' cars. He was pulling out of a nightclub, and all of a sudden, a car struck the rear of his car. He gets out to look what happened with his bodyguard, and all of a sudden, the car takes off. This is at 3 o'clock in the morning. My client, who's driving a brand new car, now chases the person, not knowing who it is, to see who, in fact, would get involved in a hit and run, not knowing who it is. Unfortunately, into a high-speed chase. The paparazzi is smart enough. He has a driver. He's taking photos, and the driver's on the phone, 911. Someone is chasing me. He mentions my client's name. He's trying to kill me. What was the net effect? Not only did the paparazzi make approximately $150,000 from that photos and the story, and a major story that created, and even the story got into the traditional press, my client faced potential criminal charges. This Father's Day, Bruce Willis was in Central Park. with his 3 children. And he's just trying to enjoy Father's Day with his kids. And all of a sudden, while they're roller skating, a paparazzi comes up to him and starts flashing the camera. And I'm not saying 1, 2. We're talking about coming within a foot to 2 feet, not only of him, but of his young children. And after 10 minutes of being assaulted, basically, by this photographer, he says, okay, you've got enough photos, let's leave it. The problem is that my client didn't react the way the paparazzi wanted. So what does he do? He starts using 4-letter words, starts to curse them in front of young children. Fortunately, in this situation, my client decided, you know what, I'll just have to leave. And he just ruined his Father's Day. Still, those photos created an opportunity. A well-known actress was leaving the airport, 2 young children, both under the age of 3. She's walking back to the baggage area. All of a sudden, there's a videographer and a photographer right in her face. And when I mean right in her face, we're talking about this close, within a foot to 2 feet, flashing, bright flashing, but not only in her, young children under the age of 3 who are crying, screaming hysterically. Passerby see what's going on, and what do? They try to create a shield because they saw what was going on. They could not believe it. Finally, the paparazzi and the videographer would not let up. They're pushing the people away. Finally, what does my client do? She decides to take it into her own hands. She slugs the guy right in the face, and everything stops. Major story, major monies for the paparazzi, and unfortunately, my client had to hire a criminal lawyer. No charges were filed, and in fact, a potential civil action occurred. Now, I'm involved right now in a landmark case in California where finally the authorities have charged the paparazzi with criminal conduct. A video and still photographer were charged with reckless driving, false imprisonment, and battery as Arnold Schwarzenegger and Maria Shriver were taking their children to school. And in fact, the battery not only involves them, it also involves passerbys. One of the problems we have here is the liability. In the United States, you cannot sue. You can sue, but you won't establish liability unless you can show the story was published recklessly. That means if a story is published and there's some reliable source who claims that the story is true, even though it's totally false, the celebrity will lose. So what has occurred? The celebrities have now decided to many times sue in England, France, other countries in Europe, and Australia because the laws are different there. All you need to establish is that, in fact, the story was false, and, in fact, it damaged your reputation. And, in fact, right now, we have suits pending in Australia for several clients, and even though these stories are totally mythical, made up, they most probably go to trial because the belief is that my clients will not go to trial. As long as there is a market for sensational stories, the tabloids and the paparazzi will continue to engage in the conduct that they do.
Okay, thank you, Moody. Steve Kaz?
I feel like I have to start by responding to Marty a bit. One of the biggest problems that the National Enquirer has is any sin of the media is dumped on the National Enquirer. I don't know how many people are familiar with a story out of Tennessee about the sin eaters, but when somebody died, they put all the food on the coffin, and one person in town would have to come and eat that food to absorb the sins from this person. And that's what the National Enquirer became at some point, and we've changed that in the past 2 years. A lot of the events that Marty described have happened, but the wrong parties are being blamed for it. If you want to take a look at what is tabloid in America, you have the National Enquirer is the name equated with tabloid. But let's take a look at the networks, and let's take a look particularly at the videographers, who are generally behind every single instance of assault that occurs on a celebrity.
What's a videographer?
A videotape versus still photographer. What's driving the market for the very types of pictures that Marty's talking about is not the print tabloids in 99% of the case, and is definitely not the National Enquirer over the past 2 years. What's driving that market is TV. And let's just take a look at some of the headlines that are on TV. Now, these are not tabloid show headlines. These are network show headlines. Exclusive. Michael Jackson reveals all to Diane Sawyer. Barbara Walters exclusive. Garth Brooks reveals his sister is gay. Matt Lauer, who's the host of the Today Show, exclusive. Did Dodie dump her for Di, the other woman in the latest royal love triangle? ABC's primetime correspondent Cynthia McFadden, who by the way is a lawyer. Tonight, a second-by-second reenactment of Di's tragic death. What you have here is that the media is descended into the tabloid realm. We have a beat. Our beat is celebrities, and we do it very well, and we realize that there are criminal activities that occur by some individuals. And in the Enquirer's case, and in some of the other celebrity beat publications' sense, they know who these people are, and they try to avoid them. We try to avoid these nasty situations. What you have had happened here is the rest of the media has come into this beat, has come onto this beat, and it's caused a frenzy. Now, when something like Princess Diana's death happens, do we expect the rest of the media to take a look at themselves? What's easier? Is it easier to point the finger at the tabloids and say, look what they did? There's a famous expression in Virgil's Aeneid. I studied classics when I was here. And the Greeks are in their city and the Trojans, and they're about to go to war, and a priest says, we have to sacrifice somebody to make sure we win this battle. So everyone gets very nervous. Then the priest points to one individual, and everyone goes, terrific, let's do it. Okay, and that's what's happened here over the past, since the death of Di, really, and as the networks have realized that they have become tabloid, but they can't admit that to themselves. It's much easier to point fingers at the, quote, formatted tabloids, the ones that look like a tabloid due to format. And I think that's really what's going on here. That's what's causing a lot of this invasion of privacy. That's what's causing a lot of this journalistic hand-wringing and causing basically the forum that I'm sitting at right now. If you want to blame the National Enquirer for things the National Enquirer has done, fine. You know, we can talk about that. But to blame the National Enquirer for what the rest of the media done is really just a case of people washing their hands of the state of journalism today.
Steve, you know, you're describing the National Enquirer as though it's a Sunday church newsletter.
We tried that.
You tried that.
No, we're a tabloid. We're sensational.
What is a tabloid, by the way?
tab-
Are we going to agree on that to begin with?
I'll give you the definition of a tabloid. It's easy to digest and quick format. And that is what the definition of a tabloid is. Secondary definition is sensational. We pride ourselves on the secondary definition. We are sensational. We don't make any bones about that. Do we, or any tabloid, need to be more sensational in this current climate? Yes. And the reason is that the rest of the media has come onto the tabloid beat. If the rest of the media would go home, which is...
Leave the whole story to you.
Correct. I mean, Marv Albert, my God. What was all the hand-wringing about Princess Di's death? Oh, my God. The paparazzis, the terrible press, we're celebrity-obsessed. My God, we have to stop this. There's all these forums and everyone discussing this. What happens? Marv Albert's toupee falls off during sex, and the whole country goes nuts for tabloid stories again. So this hand-wringing is just inappropriate.
Marty Singer, you were saying before that I don't know what you're talking about exactly, the tabloid as described just now by Steve, or...
It includes the National Enquirer.
It includes the National Enquirer, but are you also talking about more than that? Because his point is when you talk about tabloids these days, you're not just talking about the Enquirer, you're talking about ABC and a few other first-rate news organizations that he mentioned. Who are you talking about who is, quote, creating and instigating these stories and who is engaged in criminal conduct?
I'm not talking about ABC News. I'm talking about the National Enquirer. I'm talking about the Star. I'm talking about the Globe. I'm talking about hard copy. The difference between ABC News and the National Enquirer is that the National Enquirer and the tabloids, and I should make a comment about the National Enquirer. Steve Kaz is correct. They are much more responsible than most of the other tabloids. And I think in terms of my dealings with them, I have found Mr. Cosby responsible. I deal with him at least 2 to 3 times a month.
When I showed up here, I thought he was going to
shake
slap a
hands,
subpoena
You guys
on me.
want to sit next to each other?
And, no, in fact, just a quick distinction is what's happened recently. When the National Enquirer or some of the tabloids in the U.S., when they want to run a story, they will contact the publicist or the representative to find out, do you have any comments? And sometimes we're fortunate enough to kill the story. Most of the times we're not, and they're not contacting us for the purpose of having a balanced story. They're contacting us from a legal standpoint, and the denial may be in the 4th column, buried, you know, in the bottom of the paragraph of the in the last paragraph of the article. But the difference is the tabloids will pay sources for their stories, and therefore there's a motivation to lie. Because if I say that somebody slept with me, that sounds like a great story. If someone said, "Oh, that
Sounds
person,"
like a fantasy.
well, maybe for you, but if someone said that they were dancing, then that's not a big enough story. That's not worth it to pay the money. But in terms of who the tabloids are, who we're talking about, what the instigation is here is that if you have to pay for a story, and that's unfortunate. What is going on here is that many times the print tabloids, which is the Enquirer, the Globe, the Star, and some other magazines, and also the English tabloids, which are much worse, and the television program. But it is true that the line is narrowing. In terms of People magazine, I think the main difference between People magazine, perhaps the National Enquirer, is that maybe they have more glossy photos, and the headlines are not the sensational headlines. That's what the National Enquirer does, or the Globe and the Star. They come up with the sensational headlines. And if you read the article, many times it's not that bad. It's the headlines that many times grab the reader.
Russell Turiak, as you listen to all of this pious comment, what runs through your mind?
The main thing that sticks out that I have to comment on is when Mr. Singer tells you about all the client that one of his actresses hit somebody, as if like that the person got hit was the criminal in this case. To hit somebody is against the law. To speed as his client sped off after somebody is against the law. These are the things that are illegal. He's deifying the villain in these cases. Tony Danza, Alec Baldwin, Woody Harrelson, Don Johnson have all gotten away with assault. I have to point that in this country, let's face it, celebrities get away with murder.
Murder.
Yeah, you remember O.J. Simpson.
Is it really very important, this whole discussion of tabloid journalism? Seriously, I mean, what are we here for tonight? Why is it important, Fred Schauer,
Well, I think
that
it's
we're
more
into
a
this
First Amendment issue than anything
No, it is a
else.
First Amendment issue to a limited extent, I think. Fred, what is the reason that, number one, that we're here, and so what if you have tabloid journalism? So what? Is it going to affect the democracy of the United States? Is it going to bring down Western civilization? So you have some newspapers that are extreme and that sensationalize, even create and instigate. I don't know about the criminal conduct, though. But so what?
I mean, we're here for 2 reasons, I guess. One, part of the so what is one of the things we think that a legal system does is it keeps in check extreme behavior. So we are here to discuss, which is not to answer, are there certain forms of extreme behavior of all varieties that maybe as a public policy matter we ought to control without immediately saying the First Amendment as if that answers every conceivable question, and if you don't adopt a certain view of the First Amendment, then you might as well go back to Stalinist Russia in 1937. There are some serious policy issues about how do we control extreme behavior. That's less important than the other side of it. What role does the press play in public deliberation? To what extent is the press itself a central component of what we think of as democracy? And if that's right, and it seems clear to me that it is right, then the question is, do we have an interest in the quality of public deliberation? Now, Whether or not the tabloids are better or worse than the mainstream media, or better or worse than Thomas Nast cartoons or political invective of 1793, the real question is how does a democracy make its decisions, and on what basis? We only vote once a year, or once every other year, or once every 4 years. Democracy makes its decisions on the basis of a public deliberative process. That is framed by the press, broadcast press, cable press, New York Times press, National Enquirer press. We're here because we are talking about the nature of public deliberation. And that's much more important than the question of whether one of you can sue the other.
Steve Cons, is there a limit at the National Enquirer, at your desk, is there a limit as to how far you will allow your newspaper to go in prying into and intruding into the private lives of public officials, not just celebrities, but officials?
Yes.
And what is that?
Well, actually, I'm on record on that. The New York Times asked me to write a piece for them on that very subject.
No, I read that, but I don't think well,
Yeah,
explain
it does.
explain it to everyone.
We're very aggressive when we cover celebrities or public officials, and I think what Fred's getting at is a very good point. There's a difference between covering and scrutinizing these officials or celebrities who are already engaged in some behavior and doing something that causes the behavior. You use Marty was using the anecdotes of the photographers that are trying to cause that confrontation to drive up the price of the picture. Oftentimes when you get those pictures, you can tell what happened from the pictures, and we've stopped buying those pictures. We stopped this last year. You could see the climate had changed, and it's money. It was money that was driving it.
You mean that the pictures began to cost too much? And
No,
so
you could
couldn't buy
tell
it?
looking at the pictures of the celebrity angry that something had caused them to be angry that was a little out of the usual. You could just tell from the sequence of the pictures that something had happened here that was creating a picture or creating a news story.
And you are saying
we-
that you will not run a picture that you think has been
Right,
created.
and that's that's an interesting question, because look at an extreme and absurd example. We get a picture of Jay Leno in one of his antique cars at a gas station, and he's sitting there filling up his own gas, multimillionaire, cute, interesting, gossipy picture. We don't know if the reason he's out of gas is because the paparazzis have chased him for 30 miles. You get into degrees of telling what is the circumstances of a picture. One thing I'd like to get back to is what Fred brought up, which is the press. He said a phrase, which is that the American public is opinions are being framed by the press. And I think that's a huge role that the tabloids have, but in a slightly different avenue here. The celebrities have an increasing influence on the population. Never before have we seen this kind of influence. We're a celebrity-obsessed culture. We have entire magazines, new magazines, political magazines. Look at George, the magazine George, okay? It's a political magazine. What's on the cover month after month? A celebrity in some provocative and usually sexy posture, Maybe between Cindy Crawford's breast you'll find a story about the budget, maybe, but I doubt it. So you have these celebrities influencing us, and if you actually take a look at what these celebrities want to do and how they're trying to influence public policy, it's astounding. You have George Clooney wants to rewrite the Constitution. Woody Harrelson wants to legalize marijuana. Whoopi Goldberg wants to remove the Pope. John Travolta wants to influence foreign policy. Barbra Streisand, Ted Danson, Mary Steenburgen, Alec Baldwin, Sharon Stone, Rosie O'Donnell, Tom Selleck, Kevin Costner, Tom Hanks want to tell you what to vote for and who to vote for president. Now, what are they asking in return? What they're simply asking for is no press scrutiny. And if you take
Yeah, but your business is to scrutinize them.
Right, but
Okay.
what we're...
So what are you complaining about?
What I'm complaining about is that the tone is that the tabloids are over-scrutinizing. That's a nice word, I gotta remember it. Rather than invading privacy, the thought that the celebrities have banded together in a very tactile sense here. You have, I don't know how many people are aware of this, this show's Entertainment Tonight and Hard Copy are both owned by Paramount, okay? Hard Copy is a tabloid show that raucously scrutinizes celebrities. Entertainment Tonight is very celebrity friendly. When princes die, last year, George Clooney and a host of celebrities, including Madonna, went to Entertainment Tonight and said, if hard copy doesn't stop running the kinds of stories they're running and doing the kind of scrutiny they're doing, we're not going to appear on Entertainment Tonight. They delivered an ultimatum. Paramount caved in because Entertainment Tonight makes more money.
Did you run that story?
No,
Why not?
no.
Why not? You cover celebrities.
We tend to do stories that are more.
That are
you
what?
know, we actually, tell you the truth, we might have covered that in the gossip column, but we didn't cover it in any big
But I
sense
mean,
at all.
that is a big
That's
story.
a media story.
You're making a
Let me
major
tell you
point
my
right here.
Let me tell you my second
No,
part.
I don't want you to
worse.
make. No, you can't. You've talked enough. Russell Turiak, you know, there's the word hypocrisy. You used it first. I'd like you to spell that out a little bit because there may be whiffs of it here and there in this discussion.
Well, in the mainstream or legitimate media always makes me think of like, well, what does that make me, illegitimate? They never, since the beginning of the Princess Diana tragedy, have never stopped using the words murder and arrest. And neither of those things have happened. So that's just sort of the, you know, like catchphrases and the tip of the iceberg that it just continues and continues and continues. So that Steve made the point about how they've really stepped over the line. They didn't mind going into the, you know, the Dick Morris story. They didn't mind the Jennifer Flowers story. They didn't mind the tabloids coming up with the Gary Hart story. And
Gary Hart's story was broken by the Miami.
But the tabloids actually got the photographs of the monkey business.
They got the monkey business,
No.
but
Monkey
it was a
business. No, the story
photographer
wasn't
for the
broken.
Miami Herald that got
No,
the
it
first
wasn't.
story.
What
No, it
happened
was-
was that the Miami Herald did a stakeout
They did a
on
stakeout
Gary
right
Hart.
outside his
He
house.
challenged them
But
to
there were
do so.
other doors they didn't bother to stake out. So Gary Hart said, well, no, I left the other door. So then that's when the Inquirer photo became very
The first
important.
picture was the front of his house when he went out in the morning and got the newspaper.
Right,
That
but
was
there was
shot
never
by
a
the
picture
Miami
of Donna Rice coming out of the house.
That's right.
And then he later said that she wasn't there, and he weaseled out of the fact that she was in the house because there were other exits. When the Inquirer got the photo of her sitting on Gary Hart's lap, that kind of ended the issue.
Now, that was the sitting on the lap, just a minute now. Wasn't that something that was kind of created? You were the one who was saying a moment ago that 2 years ago you changed the reasons why you would buy pictures. You didn't want to do anything about creating, and you felt that if something was created or the mood was generated, you would have nothing to do with it. That's
No.
the new news judgment of the National Enquirer.
No, I don't even understand your question, but let me just explain the picture.
I don't understand your answer either, but that doesn't matter.
The-
You were saying that the National Enquirer changed its news judgment 2 years ago as to what it would run, right? That's what you said.
No, what I said was that 2 years ago, we noticed that there was some friction and confrontation between celebrities and people covering them,
Yes.
particularly photographers, and we removed ourselves from buying those type of pictures.
But did you remove yourself from buying pictures?
No.
No. So what is the difference that you're making here?
Well, the picture of Donna Rice sitting on Gary Hart's lap was from a honeymoon-type trip they took to the Bahamas on a boat. It was an existing picture chronicling the fact that they were, in fact, having an affair.
Did you know that
We
it
went
was a
out-
honeymoon type?
We went out and found the people that went with them on the cruise. We found the marina where they had stayed. We talked to the crew on the boat, and we uncovered this picture. I don't see how that's creating the news.
No, I didn't say that was creating the news. I was just trying to understand what happened 2 years ago when virtue overtook
No, if I'm saying
National
we're
Enquirer.
virtuous, then I'm misspeaking, okay?
Oh,
We're- we-
I'm sorry I brought up Donna Rice because
We
I
are the
lost
National
So what kind of a
focus.
picture? What kind of a picture would that be? This Donna Rice, Senator Hart photograph, which the National Enquirer ran proudly, I imagine.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. How much money would you get for a picture like that? You a big paparazzi type.
Well, it could probably generate, look, first of all, a photograph that's of international value will generate a lot more money than something that's, you know, just of interest domestically. So Gary Hart and Donna Rice wouldn't be very interesting in Europe.
Is that where the money is?
Well, in international sales, I mean, if you can sell a photo in one place or 43 places, you're obviously going to make a heck of a lot more
But
money.
how much money
So
do
if
you
there's
make in the United States for a picture such as the National Enquirer proudly ran? How much dough do you get for that?
Well,
I mean, let's say you took
it's always situational.
How much money did you
it
pay for it?
depends.
We paid under $50,000 for that photo.
Under 50 means what, 49?
No. We paid between 25 and 31,000. How's that?
That's good.
I haven't betrayed a confidence.
Okay.
Let me just.
But as far as the hypocrisy issue, you asked me about hypocrisy, and I really sort of had a few more things to say, and
Well,
I
I'd like to
mentioned
hear what
Donna
you have
Rice
to say
and,
on that. Go ahead,
the
have
whole
your
thing.
say.
And as far as the celebrities are concerned, there's so much hypocrisy on their part that they will do anything to get attention and publicity when they don't have any, and then when they have all they can use, they want it. They just want it when they control it. They're readily available when they have a product to sell. If it's a book or a record or a TV show or a movie, we always have to look at the clip on Jay and on Rosie and Regis and Kathy Lee in the morning. That they always have the clip. They have something to sell. Otherwise, they're not available. Like Barbara Streisand is never available, but when she's got a new record out or a film to promote, she's just everywhere to be seen. Otherwise, she's this reclusive personality. And celebrities don't want their children photographed, except if they offer you the cover of Life magazine, and then they put their kids out there. I mean, I've been in situations where there was a Steven Spielberg premiere in New York City, and then the party was at the celebrity-owned Planet Hollywood, and Don Johnson showed up with his kids and his wife, and threatened photographers not to take their picture. And of course, he was equipped with bodyguards, and got into like almost a fist fight. And he was going after guys. He was tough when he had backup and everything. And there was a big to do over it. Sonny Crockett said no, but about 5 days later, they did the same bit in Hollywood, and he stood there and posed with the kids. Now, what do the photographers in New York think the next time they see Don Johnson with his kids, or the next time any celebrity, for that matter, says, no, don't photograph my children?
Russell, what was...
It's hypocritical. It's for sale. Do you know how many times celebrities have sold photographs of their own wedding and their own baby pictures? Ask Steve.
Well,
How many times the Inquirer has bought these photos? So they want to take my living away.
You're the middleman.
I have a question.
Did Michael Jackson get $1 million for his baby pictures?
I have a question. I don't know. Did he?
Yeah.
It was stolen at the photo lab, so it was tough to get the...
No, Marty.
Wait.
He's
Did
not
he
even one
or
of your
did he
clients.
not get the $1 million?
Let me tell you, Michael
So we always
Jackson
have a
was on
sweet-
TV, 3 or 4 weeks ago, complaining about his privacy and invasion of privacy. Meanwhile, he was very happy to sell his baby pictures for $2 million around the world. He was also...
Is that what he
Yeah.
got for it?
But
$2
this
million
isn't the
around
only
world.
case.
And there's a little scandal involved in that because that money was supposed to go to the, World Children, Help the Children Fund in England, and it never materialized.
What a shock.
I have some time now for questions from you, for the audience, and there are a couple of microphones right here, so come along and we'll do it. But I want to ask Marty Singer a question first. Would I be excessively rude or impolite to say that your practice could be described as tabloid litigation?
Well, you wouldn't be rude, but it's a very small portion of our practice. But what we do is to, many times, deal with the tabloids, not so much for litigation, as to try to respond to stories, to try to make sure that false and fabricate stories are not out there.
Fair enough. All right, why don't we start here on the left? Please give us your name, some identification, and then ask a question.
My name is Massey Tajideen, and I'm an undergraduate at the college. On some level, I disagree with all of you on the panel, but I guess the question that I'm very concerned about asking is, I have no problem with you scrutinizing public officials or celebrities for that matter, but all of you seem to be dancing around the issue that there are times, that there are definite instances when you violate any sense of moral integrity or journalistic integrity in what you do. Namely, one thing springs to my mind, which is the National Enquirer in 1993 went into the funeral of River Phoenix with, I suppose, I don't know how you obtained those pictures, and took post-autopsy photographs of a dead celebrity in the coffin and then published it under the auspices of, children, this is what drugs can do to you if you overuse them. And at some point, that seems to me like a flagrant violation of any sort of privacy, and that's not scrutiny of celebrities.
You're 100% right. That was something that the Inquirer used to do. We don't do it, and I'll stand on our record there. When I took over, I fully took over in 96, August of 96, we've had ample opportunities in the past 2 years to publish pictures like that. Ron Goldman and Nicole Simpson, the slashed up bloody photos came to us first. We refused to publish those. Another tabloid did publish it. John Bonet's dead body, those pictures came to us first, we refused to publish it.
Why did you refuse?
Yeah, that's my question. Why do you refuse?
The reason we refused is we have we have a tradition of publishing those type of photos. I mean, the greatest selling Inquirer of all time is Elvis Presley in his coffin. It was a 6.7 million sales. We, in the past 2 years, have become more sensitive. We've learned how to spell the word restraint. Does it hurt our sales? Yes, it does hurt our sales.
Why are you doing it?
The tabloids that published those sold out. I mean, they sold out. We're talking, you know, in the tabloid world, those were huge. The reason we're doing it is exactly what you're pointing out. We're not saying, you know, that we're ever going to be showing enough restraint for certain Americans and certain celebrities, but we're trying to be a more acceptable product. In other words, you probably don't read the National Enquirer.
You'd be right.
Right. Well, statistics show in this room there's 15 or 20 people that do. To get them to admit it's another thing. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to become a more acceptable buy. This is market forces. Our circulation is down since the 70s. We were selling in the 6 million range in the 70s. We're down to about 2.7 right now. We've had a 5% growth in circulation since we stopped doing what you're talking about. Tabloids that have increased doing what you're talking about have grown 14%. So, you know, we're willing to take the 5.
Your question, please.
My name is Anish Venkatraman, and I'm a freshman at the college. I think a lot of us have found laying blame on each other, but I tend to see it as a larger issue. In a recent Rolling Stones article, they mentioned the growing link between business and journalism schools teaching business now more than they are journalism practices. And if business is one of the major factors that we can blame, what does that say about the values of society and how they have changed? And one of the key things, I think, is that tabloid journalism seems to be a perpetual cycle of we blame the tabloids, yet we continue to buy them. And so I was wondering if you could comment on the role of business and how that reflects society's values today.
Fred, do you want to start that discussion?
The question is very important in 2 ways. One is increasingly is the American press in all varieties, from the New York Times to the Globe and lots of things in, not the Boston Globe, the Globe, and in between. Is it increasingly profit-driven? Probably yes. Is that a problem? Probably yes. To what extent do we expect the press to transcend market forces? In an ideal world, we expect it to transcend market forces. It is doing so a fair amount less. The larger question that you ask, which is also a good one, is there a difference between following the market and being democratic? Isn't democracy maybe the $2 word for market forces? Both democracy and what you refer to as business are forms of reflecting individual consumer preferences. And it may very well be that when we don't like it, we lament the rise of business influences. When we do like it, we call it democracy. It may be that as newspapers increasingly follow market forces, they're just being democratic.
Fred, haven't they always followed market forces, really? What is the difference between the New York Times seeking a profit 100 years ago and the Times seeking a profit today?
If there is a difference, and there may not be one at all, there are at least some people who claim, and the data is a little bit uncertain, there are some people who claim that when newspapers were owned by extraordinarily wealthy families that passed on the newspaper from one to another, whether it be the Sulzbergers or the Taylors or some number of others, that there was a degree of profit independence that family honor, or whatever you want to call it, generated. Now, whether that's true or not is debatable. Whether it's a good thing or not is debatable. After all, one way of thinking of this is it's just another form of oligarchy in which a very important social institution, the New York Times, was in the hands of one family. So it's possible that there was, as many have argued, that before the rise of the current media conglomerate, in which there is a lot of cross-ownership between broadcast and print, a lot of cross-ownership between media and non-media. Before that, maybe there was less day-to-day attention to the bottom line. Maybe there was therefore a press that was more willing to be non-democratic or non-majoritarian in the short run in the service of what it believed to be long-run public values. But the skeptical question is, in a democracy, what does it mean to say that democracy is better served by the long-run values of a family-run newspaper that passes on the newspaper from one generation to another?
Question, please.
Hi, my name is Mona Miller. I'm a second-year student here at the Kennedy School, and my background is in media relations, so I find this very interesting. And first of all, I should confess a certain sin of commission, because People magazine is the only thing that makes my dental appointments even remotely enjoyable, and I think most of us could confess that a little bit. Mr. Turiak raised the point that I found most disturbing about the coverage of Princess Diana, and for lack of a better term, you labeled it hypocrisy, and I saw it very much as a she asked for it kind of argument, which was that because she agreed to do press releases or photo shoots or use media relations as it is currently used today to promote good works or her personal pet causes, that she somehow asked to be chased or down the street, or asked to be photographed with high-powered lenses, or asked to be drilled about the personal and private aspects of her love life or whatever element, any other private element. I find it quite equivalent to suggesting that because you wear your wallet in your back pocket, you're asking to be robbed, or because you wear a short skirt, you're asking to be attacked. And I think that maybe it's a moral question about what it is that we owe one another in terms of what we ask for and what we use the media for.
Well, I think you read a lot more into whether she asked for it or not. You know, was not my intention that she asked for it. She certainly made choices, and I have to tell you that I believe that some of her choices were very poor choices, and that other people involved in the scenario that particular evening made some very poor choices. So I didn't say she asked for it, but some poor choices were made. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but would you be surprised if you found out that she had, in fact, on previous occasions, actually called photographers whose phone number she had and disguised her voice and told them where she would be so that she would get coverage? There's documentation of that. People have recordings of it from her calling on a like a remote, a handheld, cordless phone. Did you know that? What would you say if I told you that she manipulated the press in that way? Would that then be an indictment of her behavior?
I was referring specifically to your questions about Barbara Streisand and others, as well as Princess Di.
Oh, you said Princess Di, so, with that particular night. And I didn't say, oh, she asked for it, she got what she deserved. I no way intended that.
No, but I don't
it's a
think
tragedy.
that the question was phrased artfully in that you were saying that, in effect, it could be read that way, that she had asked for it.
Well, that's not my intention to say that she asked for it, but what I'm saying is that who could argue that she made some very poor choices?
You know, the issue of Princess Di's discussion, for example, of her sex life and of her affairs, she volunteered for a BBC interview. It was not the BBC intruding into her private life. She called and arranged the interview with her favorite correspondent, and she talked about it openly for an hour and a half. And that was a television interview that was seen not only in the UK but around the world. That famous picture that was referred to earlier about the famous kiss of Di and Dodie on the boat was organized. That was a photo op that was set up as the result of a negotiation between the princess and the photographers, according to which she said that this will give you a shot, but there are two conditions. Don't get into a boat and come near our boat, and don't have a plane fly over our boat. But from the shore, we'll give you a nice shot, but stay away from us. So, in other words, there is, on the Princess Diana front, the point that Russell was making about celebrities seeking publicity and using the media to advance a particular cause, as you said yourself, is not new. This has happened. In her case, it was, I think we could all agree, just a gigantic personal tragedy in the way in which the whole thing ended up. So that's almost a reason why we're having this discussion tonight. That triggered interest in paparazzi, photojournalists, and the National Enquirer, which I urge you all to rush out and buy because poor Steve is losing money by the minute. Your question, please.
My name is Jamie Gannott. I'm a freshman at the college, and I'm a member of a freshman seminar in the birth of yellow journalism this semester. And one of the things we talked about to start off the class was the current state of tabloid journalism. And we've talked a lot tonight about the coverage of celebrities, and it can be argued that they use the media, and so in a sense they deserve to have this coverage, and that's one issue. But one of the articles that we specifically looked at was an article entitled $1 million Lie Detector Challenge to the Ramseys that was printed in the National Enquirer as week 38 of beauty queen murder coverage. And included in this piece was, police believe they're guilty, they say they're not, but they hadn't been arrested, so I don't know what police believe they're guilty means. It says that the Enquirer has won praise from police and attorneys for its coverage of O.J. and Ennis Cosby's murder. So my question is really, what about tabloid journalism that affects people who haven't asked to be used, people like the Ramsey parents who, whether or not they're guilty, are not celebrities and have not chased paparazzi or been chased by paparazzi? What about people who've been covered by the tabloids who aren't necessarily asking to be used by the press?
Why don't I suggest, Steve, would you like to take the first crack at that?
Sure.
Perhaps Marty?
I think what you're getting to is voluntary, people that voluntarily come in front of the press versus involuntarily come in front of the press. And the Ramseys, where do they fall? Let's take a look at what the Ramseys have done media-wise. They have given an interview to CNN. They've spent $2 million on a defense team, a public relations team. They have a website. They put out releases to all the Colorado papers on a daily basis, updating the Colorado papers on who else did this murder besides us. They have publicly acknowledged that they know they're the #1 suspects, and they have also pointed fingers at other people. So you get to a situation with the Ramseys where I would argue they're no longer involuntary, under the involuntary scrutiny of the press. Also, if you look at what drives America's fascination for the Ramsey case, it's the videotapes of John Bonet in those very sexual outfits that aired all over TV, all over all the networks and CNN for weeks on end. There's something queasy about those outfits and the sexual posturing that created an instant a celebrity of John Bonet.
You ran all that stuff too, didn't you?
The which?
Oh,
pictures?
stills of the movies,
sure,
right?
Sure,
Okay,
absolutely.
Just wanted to make that clear.
In
Marty?
fact, we have an exclusive deal with the family the family photographer.
You have an exclusive with the family photographer. The pictures of what are only yours?
We
Just pictures?
own all the pictures that the family photographer took in the past 3 years now. Past 3 years.
How much did you pay for that?
Is that confidential? $40,000.
40,000. Thank you. Any more?
I think the
Marty?
Ramsey case is a perfect example of the blending of the traditional media and the tabloid media. I'm confident that there have been more shows or just as much information on Primetime Live, 2020, shows that would never consider themselves to be, quote, tabloid, and it is newsworthy. The only difference between the National Enquirer, perhaps the way they cover the story, is the sensationalized headline, and also they feel that they can get away with a statement that the police believe they're guilty because they know that they are now libel-proof, which means that the Ramseys cannot sue for defamation based on all the inferences that exist that they may have been involved in the murder. But in fact, it shows how they are blending now the traditional media and the tabloid media.
That is alas the case. Thank you very much. Your question?
My name is Will Monahan. I'm a junior at the college. My question goes to Mr. Coase and to Mr. Cos and Mr. Singer. It seems to me that, and I must confess, first of all, that I'm not very familiar with the National Enquirer, but it seems to me that one of Mr. Singer's major arguments or major beefs was that a lot of stories get printed which just aren't true. And it seems to me that under U.S. libel laws, it's going to be tough for them to sue you successfully, or sue the National Enquirer successfully, meaning them being celebrities. So I'm wondering, does the National Enquirer ever print corrections? And if not, don't you see, I mean, do you believe that celebrities have a gripe and have a reason to be mad at the National Enquirer for these stories that are just false?
The falsehood attack that is placed at the feet of the National Enquirer is just not there, okay? If you look at the lawsuits, everyone thinks we get sued all the time. National Enquirer, boy, they get sued all the time. Virtually every magazine in America has more lawsuits against them than we do. In fact, at the dinner I was at earlier, Fred told me how many lawsuits we have.
There were 7 in this entire $316 million operation.
7
There
lawsuits.
were 7 suits pending on
And
March
there's
31st.
two of those are gone, so we have 5 lawsuits. And I bet you one of those lawsuits is the Mushroom Man up in Washington. We took a picture of a Vietnam vet picking mushrooms. He makes $600 a bag for the mushrooms. And his buddy was in the background. His buddy sued us for invasion of privacy. But I lost my track because you had a question that I wanted to get back to.
Well, I mean, it's just
Issue of
Oh,
retractions.
corrections.
and
Yes, we do. Now that's something that we broke tradition 2 months ago. Within the past 2 months, you might have read the issue you read. We did a story
I've never read the
that
National
Matt Perry was in rehab. Okay, now, when you make a mistake, the tradition of the National Enquirer was that, you made a mistake, Marty calls you up, Marty sues, Marty, you settle, you get into this long, protracted, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of negotiations. We took a totally different approach, and I spearheaded this. We ran a retraction to Matt Perry, identical size to what the original story was. Now, newspapers don't do that, okay? But our feeling and my feeling is that if you tell your readers, we are so wrong on this story, we feel terrible, we apologize to you, Matt Perry, we know that you've battled drugs before, and we don't want to heap any more concern or problems on you. We really sincerely apologize to him in a very large fashion.
Same size and same place as the original
Identical
story?
place.
So if you had a
Identical place.
front page story, you'd have a front page retraction?
That's something I hope I never have to face.
No, I mean, is that what you're saying?
I'm saying in this particular case, we broke tradition and
you
did
did
this.
that.
I don't know what we would do on a page 1.
Do you want to add something?
Well, it's a very good point you make, because I'm dealing with the tabloids on a continuous basis. The issue is from the tabloid standpoint, is not whether the story is false. And I think many times they know the stories are false. The question is, do they have a reliable source? They will publish stories knowing it's false, in my opinion, based on the fact that they feel they have enough of a reliable source. If there's some relative who happened to need money and said, I know that X and Y are doing something wrong, and they feel that's a reliable source, they'll pay the money and run the story. Now, the issue of Matt Perry, the reason it ran, I'm sure they did not have a reliable source, and they knew with that kind of story there was big exposure to pay damages, because under the law...
No, Marty, there wasn't actually, because he had just come out of rehab and was a drug addict.
He was
So-
a drug addict?
Yes, he was a drug addict, a published drug addict, an admitted drug addict, so the libel there is...
Okay. Drug addict, we move on. Please.
I am not a drug addict.
No.
My name is Marisa Fusaro, and I'm a graduate student at Boston University. And this question is actually for Mr. Turiak, but anybody on the panel can comment. We keep talking about the blending of traditional media and the tabloids, and I think that's the thing that really disturbs me the most, especially with the John Bonet coverage and the OJ coverage, and most particularly Princess Diana. But I'm wondering, the traditional media will wring their hands and say, oh, those tabloids are publishing those pictures, but yet once the tabloids have published them, they can say, and look what the Enquirer published. Here's this picture. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Turiak, what percentage of your income, if any, comes from pictures sold to traditional media?
Good question.
It's very difficult to judge, because where do you draw the line between what is now you refer to as traditional Or is that
I'm
mainstream?
sorry, I guess
Is
there's a
it
mainstream, sorry.
legitimate?
Yeah.
It's very
New York
hard for me-
Times, Boston Globe,
You mean,
something like that.
Other than the Inquirer, the Star, and the Globe particularly, or?
Yeah.
You know, because
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
Start with
regard
that.
People magazine as a tabloid myself. It's
So do I.
the same darn thing, but I would say maybe 25% of it comes from mainstream media, but the line is so thin, and my photographs are sold all over the world to magazines like New Weekly news, kind of gossipy type publications. You know, the glamour magazines all run a page or two of gossip. I mean, Time and Newsweek have a people page or a newsmaker page, and they try and dress it up with a photo of Baryshnikov or Pavarotti every so often, or a photograph of Peter Max or somebody like an artist, or somebody in a more classical art form. But they're still putting Madonna and rock stars and Mick Jagger and Mel Gibson and everybody else on those pages. So it's
So the 75% of your
it's
income
again,
comes from what is loosely
Prob-
described
Probably,
as
and
tabloid.
that's just an off-the-cuff guess on my part. I don't really have figures. But.
Your question, please.
Hi, my name is Rose Braboy. I'm a graduate of Kennedy School. And I'm also going to run for a Senate seat next year in Massachusetts.
Good for you.
Want some press?
Yeah, well, hey, I need some campaign workers. Absent from this panel is a psychoanalytical sort of perspective on what drives human beings to want to, buy tabloid magazines. And I don't know, even after my years here, I don't know if it's that human beings that we want bad news, or we're somehow being conditioned to believe that we need this. Personally, I wish they would let Diana rest in peace. I'm tired of hearing the story. So my question anyways is about public officials, and where can I expect to tell the press, hey, back off? This is all I'm going to respond to as a candidate. Simple.
Well, anytime you feel like you can say that, but whether or not that's going to happen.
Yeah, but I mean, what's fair?
It's out of
Just
your
give me
control.
some sort of,
You put yourself out there, you're subject to it. So you don't have the control.
In and out
It's
of
your,
well, see,
it's out
we-
of your control. And as far as like what it is in human beings that causes them to want to hear about gossip.
Yeah, why we...
200 years ago, the people talked over the stone wall and the back fence about whose cow had a calf. And nowadays, it's more or less, the electronic age, and all this news travels so quickly.
But bad news.
That this is the gossip, and I don't know what it is about the bad news, but the fact of the matter it is, probably the reason for the bad news interest is people feel that their lives are not good enough. They don't measure up. So much emphasis is put on how much money today. Michael Jordan gets all these millions of dollars, and the movie stars and all these people, and you feel like I'm not as successful as these wonderful, beautiful, glamorous people that lead this wonderful life.
Well, doesn't that
and
make
I think
you
that
miserable?
seeing them shot down, it humanizes them a little bit,
okay.
gives people some sort of comfort.
Let's hear from my academic dean.
It's my job as a pedantic academic to draw distinctions. Two of them have come out today. One is the distinction between the voluntary and the involuntary. There's certainly a quite good argument, I believe it, that those who are involuntarily caught up in events ought to have much greater control over their lives and their privacy than others. The other is the distinction between mere celebrities and those who are actually involved in policy making or offer their views about policy or want to be policymakers. In a democracy, there may be a much greater interest in knowing about policymakers and the like than those who just happen to be famous because they are movie stars or place kickers or television chefs or the like. Part of this says that, unfortunately, when you put both of those distinctions together, I think someone running for the state senate probably ought to have the least amount of privacy precisely because of a public interest in the qualifications and performance of those who control us. But I recognize that there's a price to that if people like you don't have enough privacy, then people like you might not run for office, and then the society might be worse off. I
agree
that's,
with that.
that's a tough decision.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me just add something.
Sure.
I spent most of my life as a journalist, and I can assure you that 95% of the reporters you're going to meet are people very much like you, who are doing their job, who want a story and who want to go home at night also, and are not interested particularly in intruding and digging into something where they shouldn't be. Most of them want to cover the news, and that's it. In a sense, this discussion has skewed the issue because we have focused on one piece of what is now, broadly speaking, the media. When I started in this racket, with all due respect to Steve Coz, he would not have been invited to the party because he wasn't part of the team. But now that we think of the press as the media, the umbrella is so much larger, and everybody can fit under that umbrella. But we're focusing on a small piece of it, which is tabloid journalism. Most of American journalism is still the best in the world, and only a craft that people ought to be very proud of.
But
I mean that most sincerely.
one thing worth thinking about in this context, the very press that Marvin has just talked about is the press that in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s treated sex and alcohol as off limits, even by public officials. And one of the things we may be seeing now is a reaction against the view that certain kinds of things that voters would want to know about and that in many cases did in fact affect job performance were undercovered. And if there is over-coverage now, it may be an overreaction to, at times, unfortunate under-coverage in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, all too often based on the boys will be boys, we're all part of the same club idea. We may have gone too far in one direction now, but at times there was a little bit too much in the other direction in an earlier era.
I don't think there's any question that what you have just said is absolutely right. But there is a suggestion in what you said that the press determines what it is that the American people ultimately get. That's not quite right. The press covers what they think the American people are interested in. And back in the 50s, one could argue that the American people simply didn't have their minds as much as they do now on the private lives of public officials or public celebrities. The kind of coverage, for example, that existed of Hollywood 40 years ago. It's totally different from the way it is today. Totally different. They were treated up there in Carol Landis, sort of draped on a bar somewhere, and that would be the end of it. You'd never ask whether she had anything to drink. Totally different. When John Kennedy was president of the United States, and I covered him for part of that, and there was not just rumors, there were feelings, there was sort of the mood music, that we knew what the president was doing, but we didn't know what he was doing. It's difference. So we didn't write it. And there was no appetite for it then. But it's all changed. It's all changed.
Okay, thank you.
We are just about out of time, but please, we'll do two more questions.
Oh, mine's quick. My name is Ann Slaughter. I'm a student at the Divinity School and also have some background in journalism. My question actually kind of builds on the one before. I was wondering, Mr. Coz, I was interested to hear you talk about elected officials and celebrities, kind of all one word. And I wonder if at the Inquirer there are different standards or a different level of scrutiny that you would use for an elected official or for a celebrity that we didn't pick the celebrities in the same way that we pick the elected officials. And they have different responsibilities and different, job requirements, if you can use that phrase. Yeah. I wonder if you would treat them differently.
Well, let me answer it a little different, and if I don't answer your question, I'll take another try at it. Let's look at Meryl Streep, a 3-time Oscar winner, and let's look at Demi Moore. All right, how many stories have you seen on Meryl Streep? I can't even remember the last time I saw a story on Meryl Streep. She's probably the greatest female actress in America today, and there's no press on her. There's no tabloid press on her. You don't have ABC Primetime interviewing her. You don't have Dateline interviewing her. You don't have CNN trying to get an interview with her.
It says something very important.
Right, and versus Demi Moore, okay? Demi Moore paints her naked body and puts it on the cover of Vanity Fair. Demi Moore, I can't even remember how many times I've seen her naked body now, but she uses this as a press vehicle to become a greater celebrity to make more money. So the level of privacy, and I'm not a lawyer, but in my mind, intuitively, as an editor, I would give Meryl Streep a greater level of privacy than I would give Demi Moore.
But her question did have to do with the distinction between a celebrity, say, both of your actresses, and a public official, someone, I assume you meant an elected to office.
Right. Well, I'm thinking, so you have one picture of a U.S. senator smoking a joint at a party and one picture of Demi Moore smoking a joint at the party.
Yeah.
Is there a different level of scrutiny? No, I don't mean anything against her, but a different level of scrutiny that you would use or a different discussion that you would have in your editorial meeting when you're deciding whether to run
Yeah,
one or the other?
the picture of the public official, let's not use pot because, you know, you need something that's more,
Okay, smoking crack. How's that?
okay, there we go. Look at Marion Barry, it helps you. Anyway, that would be, you know, a quick decision. Bam, done. Public officials, smoking crack, going out and making decisions that affect your life, wow, you know, that would run instantly. A celebrity, you know, it would be different levels of discussion about how invasive that picture was, how was it gotten. I'd be less concerned about the picture of the government official.
Last question.
Hi, my name's Adam Storgard. I'm a freshman at the college. One of the things that's I've noticed in this discussion of tabloid journalism is all the cases that you refer to have a direct object, like someone whose privacy is violated or whatever. But one of the parts of tabloid journalism that's particularly bothered me in the past is that has no specific victim, such as like scare tactics is the one that really bothers me particularly. I mean, I've seen TV news reports, especially the one that comes to mind is, for me, is 7 News in Boston, involving just various things to scare parents or homeowners or tenants or in various aspects of their lives about. And my question is, what do you feel about those, like, that's part of tabloid journalism?
Scare tactics? I'm a little confused with your
Yeah,
question.
well, I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is advertise. I mean, such as you refer to, and like it comes onto 2020, or local news, like I say. I mean, with products that did something to someone, or like, I'm sorry.
And your point is whether all of this kind of presentation ends up frightening, excessively
I think he's
influencing the
asking,
viewer.
I mean, the question, Steve said maybe I ought to say something about it because it's a local station you've referred to. I think part of what the question is everything that we've talked about for the last hour and a half in the context of particular individuals and possibilities of excess may be also true these days about stories and journalism, even when it's not about particular individuals. Is there an increasing degree of inflammatory journalism even when we're not talking about individuals, and therefore even when we're not talking about privacy or libel?
And so, like, how would you treat those, I guess?
Yes, I think it's just the same answer. I think the American public likes to see sensational, quote, type stories, in the sense that these are the type of stories that may get better ratings as opposed to just reporting on the news. And that is the blending that has occurred, which is that you will find stories, whether it's about an individual, whether a politician or celebrity, or about some event, and to the extent that a news organization can make it more sensationalized, it may increase ratings.
Let me give the panel an opportunity, 30 seconds each, for a final burst of wisdom. And if you don't have it, just tell me. Honestly, we'll move right on. Russell.
Oh, I got closed first also. Well, there's a celebrity-driven society that we live in. There's an enormous power of celebrity, and I think we all have to put in perspective the fact that, everything is for sale here. Even the question that the young gentleman brought up with is that a lot of, I think, what he was referring to are the teasers, and the reason they call it a teaser is to tease you into, like, watching what it is. And, we have to put this into the perspective that, take a step back and look at how important is it really, like, what any of them does, and if, there are, insects in your pillow. And if you
Okay.
need to watch the footage at 5 to get this information, like, you have to know when you're being sold a bill of goods.
Russell, thank you. Marty?
The issue that I'm concerned about is it important for the American public to know the truth, or is it important to get sensational stories? And that's what we have now. It's not important whether a story is necessarily true. If it's sensational, it'll get published.
Steve Cos?
I want to basically cap off coming back to what the young man over there said. When I was in, and this gets to basically everything gone tabloid. When I originally was invited here, I was told that I was joining a forum, quote, that will look more broadly at the complexities of journalism today. A few days ago, Harvard changed this. The title, Have the Tabloids Gone Too Far? Now, why would you do this? Because you draw a larger audience with the title, Have the Tabloids Gone Too Far, than with the complexities of journalism today.
Good point.
Even Harvard's gone tabloid.
Fred?
In this audience, and here I'm talking particularly about the students, in this audience of extraordinarily talented people and young people, there are probably 3 people in this audience who might consider a career in public life, but will be dissuaded from it because of the nature of current press coverage. That's a social problem.
It is a social problem, and I'm very happy that Harvard decided to change the title. Because
it lets the networks off the hook.
It lets, I don't know what it lets off the hook. But it does give us an opportunity to talk about a really complicated issue. And one point that was made several times tonight, and I think in Marty's closing comment as well, and Russell's point, is that we do live in a complicated society, and there's no question that celebrity status gets you a table in a very crowded restaurant, and a lot of other things as well. And journalism has changed profoundly from what it was even 10 years ago to what it is today. And we're very loose in definitions. We're all talking about the media, and we all talk about tabloid. And I don't think that we're quite sure of what it is that we're talking about, but there is a sense of unease that it isn't quite right. And it isn't, but it's a good thing to talk about. So thank you all very much for coming, and thanks to our panelists very much for doing this.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys are great. Thank you.
It was very
Come
good.
visit again sometime.
It's a very tough subject. The American people don't want,
So they don't want
they don't want to hear it. They really don't want to hear it.
Give us a chance.
Thank you.